You also get the sound? Okay. Great. Hello, everyone. Hey, Paul. How are you?
I'm all right. Long time no see, Rudy.
Yeah. Are you in the Sussex office?
I am sweating my forehead here. I think this is the last day of hot weather in England.
Ah, really? It's quite cold here today. I'm wearing a kind of
Yeah, it
jacket.
was meant to be cold here today, but well, I've just been out for a walk, so yeah.
Mm,
But no, it's still pretty nice.
nice. There is an iPad Pro that's trying to join. I want to know who they are, though.
Yeah. Are you still in Oxford physically?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
But you don't have any. Do you have an Oxford
Mhm.
official? Oh, do
Yeah,
you? Oh, right. I see.
yeah,
Nice.
yeah. I'm still affiliated with the university. We
Cool.
find our ways to keep at least one foot in there. Yeah.
Well, where
Um,
are you to?
I'm in Ghent.
In Kent still. Right.
Ghent, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna remove the iPad person, but there's another iPad trying to join.
The same
Hmm.
iPad.
Do you see two?
Yep.
Has the iPad person been able to join? Someone with a 12.9-inch fifth generation iPad? Mm, okay, I might have to remove one of them because it's bringing up an error. Great. Oh, great. Okay, amazing. Um, nice. Okay, great. Carl is here too now. Hey, Carl, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. It's been a while since I've chaired one
Sure.
of. Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay, great. So I'm just gonna pull up one thing. Okay. Um, welcome everyone. Just so everyone knows, this recording is being recorded. This meeting is being recorded, and it will be uploaded on YouTube with public access. So if for any reason you don't want to be on camera or anything, then that's completely fine. But I do tend to encourage everyone to turn their cameras on and engage with the presenter in that way. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. And today we have Toon. I will have him introduce himself shortly, just after a quick reminder that of the structure of the meeting, which is we'll have around 30 to 40 minutes of Toon presenting on his work, and then followed by a Q&A with all of the attendees for about 15 to 20 minutes. It can go on for a little bit longer if the discussions are going on for a little bit longer and are interesting. And then we will have Carl conclude the meeting for about 20 to 30 minutes. So, yeah, that's the structure of the meeting. Take it away, Tone.
All right. Hi, I'm Toon. So some background about me. I did my PhD on active inference for scene understanding at Ghent University. And my research now focuses on embodied intelligence, active inference, and robotics with a focus on online and continual learning. I will share my screen. Can everybody see it?
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect. So I will talk today about hierarchical active inference for abstract task learning and spatial navigation. Um, so to start, cognitive maps are a very interesting concept because they are believed to be representing like an internal representation in the brain of how to navigate physical space. So the hippocampus is seen as a cognitive map where they represent the physical location where they are and which they can navigate to plan where they have to go. But interestingly, this is not the only place where these cognitive maps could occur. So if you look at the right side of the slide, it shows a more abstract representation of a task that needs to be solved. So you need to get home, but first you need to go through the south sidewalk and then to the north sidewalk. And so you can also treat these more abstract concepts as a cognitive map through which you need to navigate to basically plan towards where you want to be. And it's believed that these kind of higher abstract cognitive maps are inside the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And so to look at these things, we kind of look at this spatial alternation task. And so in this spatial alternation task, you have this W maze, so a maze with 3 corridors, in which a rodent essentially has to navigate first to the center, then to the left, then to the center again, and then to the right. And the interesting thing is that when it's at a decision point at each of the corridors, it needs to decide where to go. And at the center, it needs to pick whether it goes to the left or the right. And it has to make this decision based on whether it comes from the right or the left. Because if it's coming from the right, it should go to the left and vice versa. While in the outbound scenarios, when it's in the outside corridors, it has only one option. It has to go to the center. And so in this study, they essentially look at how these decisions are made. And when there is an awake sharp wave ripple, they disturb the communication between they disturb the communication in the brain between these 2 regions, and they see that the outbound trajectories, so when it has to make a decision at the center, are no longer correctly taken, while the inbound is perfectly executed. So essentially what they see is that this spatial memory is done in this communication there. And so then there's this other study where they have a similar setup with a maze with 3 arms. And the rule is very similar. It has to go to the left, to the center, to the right, and then back. But in this one, they kind of show that these rodents are able to learn multiple rules and that they can cycle through the rule and figure out how to solve it. And so to do this, we want to model this computationally using active inference. And we create this W maze in the mini-grid environment in which the agent, the red triangle, has a 3x3 grid around itself. And it can, it basically just observes it. And it observes the reward at the end of each corridor if it follows the rule correctly. So if it's correct, it will get a reward at the end of the corridor, but if it's not, it will not get a reward. And there is the alias on the central corridor, just like in the biological study. And so these are the 20 unique observations the agent can have, but clearly these are aliasing, because this observation 1 is, for example, the same for each of the 3 corridors. So the model will need to figure out how to deal with this ambiguity.
Sorry, Toon.
Yes.
Could you just clarify what it means to be aliased?
Yes, of course. So the observation will be exactly identical, but the physical location in the maze where it is not. So for this one observation at the end of the corridor, it could be either here, here, or here.
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
And so first I want to go through how we can model these 2 parts of the brain as a hierarchical active inference model. And so on the right, we show the generative model, which consists of basically 2 layers. So as is standard in active inference, we have action plans that are generated top-down, and they give the context for the lower level to then execute these plans. So if we look at each level individually, level 1 is the bottom level, and it concerns itself with spatial navigation. So it kind of maps to the hippocampus, where the agent observes the current tile or the 3x3 grid around it, and its actions are move forward, turn left, or turn right. And then The second level concerns itself more with an abstract task space where, so these states are, am I in the left corridor, the right corridor, or the central corridor? And the actions would be moved to a particular corridor. So this level 2 observes the state of level 1 and the reward. And when it sets a preference to the lower level will execute it until a free energy threshold is reached, indicating that this high level goal has been completed, and then it goes into the next stage at higher level. So that's kind of the rough or the general structure of the hierarchical model. But because these observations are aliased in both the bottom level, so you have the same observation mapping to different physical locations, and at the higher level, because you have the central corridor indicating both whether you should go to the right or to the left, depending on where you come from. We need a mechanism to learn this, to disambiguate these alias states. And for that, we look at clone structured causal graphs by the study of Dilip George. And it's actually a nice model. It's a partially observed Markov decision process, but it has a fixed likelihood structure that for a particular observation maps to a multitude of equivalent clone states. And so the whole disambiguation happens through the learned dynamics. So essentially the B tensor. So the sequence of observations tells you in which particular state you are rather than that happening through the likelihoods. And so this is learned using the expectation maximization algorithm. And with Viterbi decoding, you can reduce the state space to not have it over-dimensionalized. And so to show how this actually looks is if you have this environment at the top, this is a figure from the original paper, where the center is all gray squares. If you have a standard Markov decision process, all these observations would map to the same state, and you would have a lot of ambiguity on whether you are here, because you would only be encoding the probability of going to this one, but not which of these exactly you are in. While using these clone graphs, you can actually encode all of these tiles individually. So how do we then use these kind of mechanisms together with the hierarchical model to learn this particular task? Is essentially first, we take the W maze, we generate an offline data set by randomly navigating the maze. And then we use this to learn the dynamics using the expectation maximization algorithm of this low-level model. And so the observations here are the 3x3 grids and the actions I've been through. And then once we have this, we do exactly the same thing, but we take the state of the learned level 1 and we gate it based on the observation that is the end of the corridor, such that it learns this coarse grain level in a task space. So the observations are now the states of this end of the corridor, and the presence are not present of a reward. And now these maps look a little bit complicated, but then if you only replay the actions during a successful sequence, then you can clearly see the structure of a corridor emerge and the four individual states of the high-level sequence. So we use active inference for planning. So in this hierarchical model, we can treat both levels of the POMDP both levels of the model as a POMDP, where they are parameterized by A, B, and C matrices. So the A and the B, they come directly from the clone graph, except that we add an extra dummy state, such that if the clone graph did not learn a particular transition, we map from taking that transition to this dummy state, and then we can assign a negative preference on this state such that it will not try to do this action. So an example is if you are in front of a corridor and you would walk through the wall, then it could not encode that properly. So having that dummy state will just ensure that it will not perform these actions or not try these actions. And then so the C preference is set up front. For the highest level is just get reward, and then for the lower level, this is set by the action selected by the higher level. And so what we saw is we did this comparison of active inference planning with the standard clone graph planning, where you do more of a greedy action selection, and then it resolves ambiguity faster, so it reaches the goal faster. And in cases like the T-maze, where if you take the wrong decision, you will be penalized because you cannot go back to go to the correct decision. It has a higher success rate because it looks at the queue first, essentially, while the other one takes a guess. And so actions are selected using expected free energy and inductive costs together, where the expected free energy is just the information gain and a utility term, while the inductive cost essentially measures the distance towards a goal state in state space, so in the learned dynamics of the model. So just to walk through it, if the top level sets get rewards, then the policy will be inferred at level 2. It will expect to be in the right corridor if it wants to go to the right corridor. Then this sets the preference at a lower level, which infers the policy of stepping forward. And then it will keep acting until this free energy threshold is reached, where the state is indicating that it is actually in the pose of R. And then it keeps going for the next corridor. Then to compare with the biological study, we kind of wanted to look at what would happen if we would impair the communication between, to have the spatial memory. So remember, if you have the hippocampal sharp wave ripple, you can disturb the rodent, and then the performance drops to around 50% if it's disrupted, versus the undisrupted one that is performing the task better. So what we do is basically disrupt this communication to include the prior or the empirical prior in the high level. And then what we see is that the inbound trajectory is still solved correctly as expected, because it observes that it's in an outbound corridor and it knows it has to go to the center. But the outbound trajectory drops down to like a 50% success rate, which is in line with the ID of the biological study. Then as an additional thing, we wanted to look at what if we can learn multiple rules using the same model. So in this study, we have 3 times the same rule, but the corridor in which it switches changes. So here it's the central, here's the left.
All right, Toon, can I just ask for is it okay to ask questions as we go?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Could you go back one?
Yes.
So it's still better than random.
It is still better than random.
But how would you explain that if the top level planning has been disrupted?
Yes, because at random, it can pick one of the 3 corridors. But when it's inbound in the center, it knows it should not pick the center corridor. So then it knows it should pick either the left or the right.
Okay, so that's going to be 50%.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, okay, I see. Thank you.
So multiple rules. And so what we can see is that after learning this high-level cognitive graph, it has created these sub-cycles of the 3 different rules. And what I did here to color them is I replayed a long sequence of being in a particular rule, and then I looked at the states that were active. And this way I could extract like these 3 subgraphs encoding the 3 different rules. And this is nice because now if we change the rule at runtime, we can see that it can clearly infer which rule it is in. So here it's cycling between 1, 2, and 3. And essentially, if now it figures out it's in rule 1, but then the reward drops, it needs to re-infer in which rule it is, and it figures out that now it's in rule 2. And then it adapts its actions correspondingly. But so now we have this mechanism where if we want to scale to multiple rules, we essentially have to keep growing and growing and growing this higher level model, while in reality, this rule is exactly the same. It's just the particular instance to which it maps that changes. So that makes us want to think about schemas. So schemas are these mental templates of experience that are shared across different experiences. So in this case, it's that going from A to B to C to B is the same as going from B to C to A to C in an abstract structure. And so this is the bit that would allow a human to generalize knowledge really quickly, because once you figure out what the template is you are in, you don't need to explore each of the distinct stages. So for example, the order of operations of dining in a restaurant would be you order food, you receive the order, and then you eat. But then regardless of which restaurant you are in, this schema would be the same, right? So for that, we look at this new study from El-Gabi et al., where they have the ABCD task. And so this ABCD task is a maze, a 3x3 grid, where a rodent has to visit 4 distinct locations in sequence. So first A, then B, then C, then D. But this order of four goals remains the same. And the spatial locations remain the same. However, the distinct locations where the A is, those change. So the abstract structure remains the same, the spatial structure remains the same, but it's the map between the two that varies between the tasks. So you have this abstract schema that maps to particular physical locations. And yeah, it's important that these the goal locations are not marked by any sensory cue. So the rodent just sees this same grid across all of the distinct blocks. And in the study, they see that once the rodent discovers the 4 goal locations, it does not search again for a 5th location, but instead it moves directly to A again, which indicates that they would be using some form of schemas. So similarly to the previous model, we want to do parameter learning using the clone graphs. But now we create this new environment, which is inspired by the biological study of a 3x3 grid of wells. But each of these wells consists of another 3x3 grid and some extra nodes. In total, it's 105 physical locations, but there's only 5 unique observations. So the agent only observes the tile it is actually on. And so to train the low level, what we do is randomly walk around in the maze for 10,000 steps, collect the actions, the observations, and the rewards. And then we extract this clone graph of the physical space. Now, in contrast to the first part of the paper, we do something slightly different. To learn the second level, we use this Maxwell demon trick, where we gate the communication to the higher level, specifically on rewarding states. So now the higher level would only learn the sequence of states to visit that is rewarding. But this avoids the need to specify that it's this corridor location that wants to be passed up. And so if we train on the data from a single block, we get this ABCD structure at the high level. And if we train on 2 blocks, we get these 2 subcycles. So we kind of see the same pattern emerge from the earlier study. And they can be learned online. But so the idea now is that instead of having these 2 subcycles, we want to map that to a particular schema and only have one at a higher level, right? And so for that, we consider the higher level as a abstract structure or the schema that is shared across the various training blocks. So to do that, we introduce this grounding likelihood that maps the state of level 2 to a specific spatial location. So if you look at this graph on the right, you have the 4 abstract states, and then you have the physical nodes. The grounding likelihood would map, for example, A to 295, which I don't know by heart, but I think it's the central one here, and so on. Yeah, because it's here. And then so if we look at the generative model again, this grounding likelihood would be where this red arrow is. So the communication between the level 1 state and the observation that maps to the schema. So by modeling this as a categorical distribution with a Dirichlet prior, we can update it using conjugate updates, where this is the current parameter value, and then we add this outer product of the observed state here, and this modified level 1 state. And it is modified because the high level, if you remember, it's trained on only the positive rewards, so only the rewarding sequence. But if you want to learn online, you sometimes just observe situations where there is no reward. And so for that, we modify this as state distribution to be 1 over n minus 1 in all locations where there is maybe reward, and just 0 at the location you currently observe. So you're essentially saying, I am certain that the reward is not here. And this kind of helps, because then you dynamically change the weight you would put on this mapping in the grounding likelihood. And so if we then test that on our environment, we have multiple variants. So the first one is as high K, so schema, hierarchical active inference, known, where the high level is known up front. So we train it on a single block, and we provide it, and the only thing that's learning during learning online is the grounding likelihood. But we also have a variant as high L, where L stands for learned, where the grounding likelihood is learned, but also the high level POMDP parameters are learned online. And then we compare it against 2 agents using the mechanism from the earlier in the presentation with 20 or 40, like trained on 20 or 40 blocks. So this I said. And then, yes, the planning uses inductive inference such that it can basically plan longer into the future. And so what we see is that in this graph, that the agents trained on all the tasks, they reach success faster, but they don't reach optimal success. And that's because some of these 4 blocks are very similar, and it's constantly switching between which of the subcycles it is actually in. If you train on half of the tasks, you end up with about half of the performance, so that also makes sense. But then the schema hierarchical active inference models, because they modify while they are being executing, they don't have this problem of being confused between two blocks, because then they just modify their grounding likelihood parameters and they reach optimal performance. And so to look at a few instances of grounding likelihoods here, the A location is mapped to, the A abstract state is mapped to the location 79, while here location 79 is mapped to the B physical location. So that kind of indicates what that does. And then the steps per trial is quite low for the models that are learning fast, but for the models that are failing, essentially the steps per trial is much higher. Because we started with these alternation tasks, we modified this task a little bit such that it's also an alternation task. So it becomes the ABCD task instead of D. So the B and D location overlap now. And so now we need the higher level to also be a clone graph, which we do. And then when we also have a learned online and a known upfront variant, and they both seem to solve the task correctly. And if you do not use a clone graph at a higher level, you just reach a 75% success rate, just because of the confusion where it needs to go at particular instances. And then, yeah, you see that this B and the B accent, or the B prime, states map to the same physical location in the learned likelihoods. Now, this is nice, but at these instances now, for each new block, you need to instantiate a new grounding likelihood to learn. And that is not very flexible, because in the reality, you don't know when you would be in a new block or when you need to learn a new thing. And if you then encounter an old situation, you don't have that information anymore. So you would want to do knowledge accommodation. And we do this by having a mixture of likelihoods. So to retain the knowledge, what we now actually have is this switching variable Z that selects the grounding likelihood that maps the high-level state to the low-level state. Yes, this should be an O for observation. I'm sorry about that. But the idea is that, so for each particular block you are following, you have a separate likelihood. And then you can infer which of the grounding likelihoods you are in by looking at the expected log likelihoods of the observed data underneath all of the models you have, all the likelihoods you have. And that's, so here we do the same trick where if we observe a negative reward or no reward, then we invert the likelihood to represent the possibilities where the reward might be instead of the current observation where you do not have it. And the nice thing about all of this is that if we now measure that the expected low likelihood here falls below a particular threshold, we know that our model is not explaining the data well, and we can dynamically add a new grounding likelihood. So we can learn this new mapping without forgetting about old knowledge. And that's also what we see if we do our experiments, because here we show the expected log likelihood, and we see that each of these dashed lines, it represents a new block that's instantiated. We see that the expected log likelihood drops below the threshold, but as a new likelihood is instantiated, it no longer drops until the next block is instantiated. So it's constantly creating new likelihood matrices to capture the sequence. So you see that then, yeah, you have a mixture, you have multiple of these. But it's clear that there is no advantage over the standard approach without a mixture of likelihoods because we are not reusing different blocks. So across the 40 blocks, they're all individual, unique. So we did a new experiment where we have 20 unique blocks, which we randomly sample over the 40 block instances. And then we see that now there is a clear advantage of having this mixture of grounding likelihoods where when it re-encounters this situation, it gets to reward much faster. And so here you see the inference of the switching variable. So at first it creates new matrices, but here it re-infers that it's in the same task as here. And so it keeps going like that. Finally, we also noticed some goal distance cells. So in the rodent study by El-Gabi et al., they find that there are these goal progress cells, and those are neurons that are tuned to particular stages in the task. So they see that regardless of you're going from C to D or from A to B, you have this neuron 1 that is tuned to early progress, mid progress, and late progress. Now, while we do not have exactly the same, we find that we have something similar. We have cells that represent the distance towards a particular goal. And we find this by looking at the inductive costs. So that is essentially how far is this state from the goal state according to the latent dynamics. And so you see that, for example, for C to go to D, this has the same kind of values or activations, regardless of which path you take, or even if you go from B to C. So it's not a goal progress cell, but it's more like a goal distance cell. So to conclude, we propose a hierarchical active inference architecture that combines the clone structure cognitive graphs at the two levels, mapping to hippocampal and prefrontal functions. We validated this against biological disruption studies and demonstrate that we can learn multiple rules. Additionally, we propose a mechanism to abstract these higher order transition dynamics as schemas in hierarchical active inference, and introduce a mixture of grounding likelihoods to accommodate this knowledge, such that we can reuse this knowledge. Finally, we also demonstrate that using the schemas reduces computational complexity and increases the performance on the agents on these kind of tasks. Thank you to my collaborators and to you all for listening. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Toon. If I can have everybody just unmute and give him a round of applause, Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul and Ian, as well. Great. So let's open up the floor for any questions that anyone may have. You can just simply unmute, and if it's getting a little bit too crowded, then we can use the raise hands function. Sorry, Ian, are you saying something? No? You're muted.
Just trying to verbalize a question so I could ask it coherently.
Okay, I see. While you do that, maybe I can ask a question and it will give you some time to do that then. So Toon, I was wondering that with more, you're working with 2 layers within the hierarchy at the moment, right? If we were to add more layers to this hierarchy, how do you think the gating mechanism being primarily dependent on reward creates a problem, if any? Because then there wouldn't be any differentiation between schemas. They would all be tied to one another, right?
Yeah, that's true. I think that's a very interesting question because, I think it's the most difficult question to answer if you want to automatically build these hierarchies, is how do you actually coarse grain this, or how do you pick what to represent? So yeah, one mechanism that I think of, but I'm not sure that's the best one, is that you could look at basically the free energy. So you give limited complexity to each of the levels, and then you look at how well these things are being encoded by that level. And then if that is reaching some kind of threshold where it's not being encoded well, then you push it up to another level. And then you start representing that at a higher level so that has more context for the lower level, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So actually, as a follow-up then, so one way to differentiate between the different gating mechanisms is just to have different thresholds for them. Do you see any other form of gating mechanism?
I mean, you could also, I think, just group things together. So if, yeah, I think you can just say, okay, I will always take 4 subsequent states and push them together up, and then do some temporal coarse graining and this kind of fixed mechanism, and then you don't have to rely on these thresholds.
Yeah, so you would add like conditions within the state space.
I think so.
Yeah, cool. Cool. Ian.
So I find your presentation to be very interesting and intriguing, and I'm wondering whether in many ways if the concept of procedural replay, like that type of automatic motor dependent learning that you get after continual exposure and exposure to the same task over and over again, how that could perhaps be integrated into your type of model. I mean, there is an interesting paper that I read. I didn't read the entirety of it, but this was a paper from the Sainsbury Wellcome Center in which some folks at a lab there talked about the dorsal striatum responsible for doing this type of replay independent of the hippocampus. And what it essentially does is that it's mainly a retrospective type of planning by which there are distinct mechanisms in play that do not only involve the implementation of these cognitive maps that are usually intrinsic or usually attributed to the hippocampus, but that there's something independent of it. So that's my question. I mean, that's a muddled question. It might perhaps be a loaded question, but I wonder what you would think of procedural replay, that
That's
automatic type of
interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think replay is very interesting, especially for learning these maps, because if I understand it correctly, because I'm not sure I do, but the replay, you generate these trajectories using the generative model and then use this data to retrain the parameters of the generative model, right?
Okay, how about I could simplify what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So in robotics, when would a robot benefit more from a cognitive map than from procedural replay? When repeating a known route or finding a new path after the environment changes. So if I could say that in more simple terms.
Yeah, I think the situation is where that these replay mechanisms then they allow you to essentially plan for situations where, for example, suddenly a door gets blocked, and then through this mechanism you can actually learn these alternative paths, right? And also, like, as I understood it, then you could learn these shortcuts throughout the the data. So in the data, you can take an alternative longer path, but through these replays, you could actually find like these extra connections because the combination of multiple paths, um, by taking the fastest bits of each of the paths, you could find like a shortcut to get to your goal quicker. I'm not sure if that
Yeah,
answers.
that absolutely helps. I was wondering whether if that would be if that particular approach would be best explained under a hierarchical active inference framework that you proposed, and I wonder if this adds a little more nuance or explanation to what whether if this is incorporated in your overall theoretical framework.
Okay, so currently it is not incorporated, so I'm only training on offline recorded data. But there is a paper by my collaborator, Giovanni Pezzulo, who does do this active replay to train their hierarchical generative model. And they do find that it learns these shortcuts and so on in also these spatial navigation tasks.
Thank you. That answered my question.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, just to say that, there was a lot of work 15, 20 years ago, Dolan, and talking about model-free versus model-based and different parts of the brain doing things, and it never really added up because everything conflated. And I've always felt that hierarchical active inference is a way of, maybe not the right way of thinking about it, but model-based planning controlling model-free modules underneath. I don't know if you would comment on that, or would you think of things in that way simplistically?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Yeah, I fully agree. It seems as if on the higher orders of the hierarchical model, you would get a lot more benefit from planning and doing active reasoning and um, yeah, navigating essentially the world that is changing. While at the lowest level, it seems like you would be using more habituated um, things, like you have reflexes or
Yeah.
you've done you've got
Yeah,
like class a
total
hundred of
pure
times.
reflex. Yeah.
Yeah,
And you
exactly.
just
So,
have voting mechanisms between them. Yeah.
yeah. No, I think that is, I don't know, that seems sensible to me at least.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes I was never comfortable with the way they tried to squeeze it into model free versus model based. I feel that this is well, active inference, hierarchical active inference in
Yeah.
general is a more holistic one model way of explaining both types of behavior. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's definitely the way to sell this type of stuff, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think at the lowest level, probably before it becomes a reflex, you do need active inference to do the trying out and to figure out what works. And then once you've got that, you can amortize those things.
Yeah, there was I can't remember who it was. There was a theory which was like plan until habit. That was, I think Diane was involved in that. Yeah. So in his way of model based becomes model free. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And this would be a way of framing that. Yeah, cool.
I like that. Model-based becomes model-free. Yeah. Um, I have a more general question, actually three general questions. Um, but if you could speak to some limitations you think of the current work, as well as where you're taking this for the future studies, if you are. And then slightly separately, um, you mentioned that like all of the biological studies that you mentioned in the presentation were rodent based, right? So I was wondering if you have any insight as to how humans do it and if this fits onto the data for human cognition.
Yes. Okay. So for the first question, the limitations, I think one of the larger limitations is that now we are looking at a single template, a single schema, and we are not actively considering which of the schemas you need to infer. So you're kind of assuming that, okay, this thing is shared across all of the instances you encounter, and in the real world, that would never be the case. So we would need some kind of like the active reasoning mechanism at the B tensor level to select which of the dynamics you need to do while figuring out this grounding likelihood mixture. So then it becomes a very hard identification problem, because do you remap it or do you learn a new schema? So I think that's a weakness at the moment that definitely we want to look at into the future. As well as the question you hinted at earlier, where the gating mechanism is a little bit ad hoc currently, and it would be nice if we figure out how to gate properly and automatically, then you can scale infinitely in the hierarchy, right? On to the biological data, I am not sure. So I know that, for example, they did this work on the rodents, but then the yeah, the model we have does not exactly fit the prefrontal cortex data they had, because they did not find these kind of high level task cells in the rodent prefrontal cortex for this particular cell. So I am not sure about if it's the same for humans or if that would be different. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, just one question about these navigational tasks, and as well as the implementation of hierarchical active inference when it comes to the Mohammadi Al-Gabi paper. I was wondering whether if you could also comment upon more broader tasks that not only involve navigation, but high order cognitive functions that are um, deeply linked to cognitive maps, whether if this type of hierarchical active inference framework that involves these clone graphs and these schemas also applies to other domains that are intimately involved in the same type of structure or same type of framework.
Yeah, I think that this kind of mechanism is not specific to navigation. It's just a very easy toy environment to evaluate this kind of problems on. But I could imagine things like cooking or cleaning or whatever to have a very similar mechanism. So for example, if you're making I don't know, a vegetable salad, you would pick each of the vegetables, you would cut them up, and then you would put them in the pot. And then regardless of which vegetables, this is kind of the general schema, right? That you remap it to the same thing. So I think this is not specific to navigation, but just to any kind of sequence of tasks where there might be some shared commonalities.
Okay, and And regarding the schema, what's the so I'm very new to this, as you certainly could perhaps infer, but what's the difference between a schema and a latent variable representation? What are there subtleties, subtle differences between the two?
Yeah, I think the core difference is not the model itself, but more the fact that you can reuse the dynamics of the latent across different mappings. So it's the same abstract latent representation that gets used, while in a normal representation you would have for each vegetable, for example, you have a specific latent, while now you just use that bit.
Okay, thank
And
you very much.
that helps because then once you figure out in which kind of schema you are, you know what are the next abstract stages you would encounter.
Thank you very much.
So, for example, just to take the example that you presented within the slides of ordering food, right? Like a specific fine-grained representation of that would be ordering food at McDonald's that is, I don't know, at the bottom of the road or something like that. And then at a higher level, it would be ordering food at any McDonald's versus ordering food in any fast food place versus ordering food in general, right? So they would still be latent spaces themselves or latent representations, but it's how they are contextualized and how reusable they are. Cool. Okay. If we have no other questions, then it's Carl's turn.
Is it my turn now?
It is your turn now.
Very good. Excellent. And lovely to see you again, Toon. Yeah, so normally, as you probably know, I go through harvesting papers for your edification and entertainment, but I haven't done that this time because you know more about this than I do. So I'm just going to limit myself to congratulations and just asking a few questions just to pursue some of the issues that you've already spoken about. I mean, this is incredibly impressive work, and I presume it's under submission. The archive one is currently being reviewed. Excellent. So just a little bit of sociology here. So I've been trying to get in touch with Dilip because I thought he was still at Google, and I had an exchange with one of their senior people and sort of pointed their senior people to him. But he left. He left about sort of 3 months ago or 4 months ago, and I can't find out where he is. Where is he now?
He is at Astera.
Ostera.
Yeah.
Can you spell that?
I will look it up.
Oh, well, no, don't worry. Is this another company then? Does he retain a sort of academic affiliation, or is he?
Yeah, it's another company.
I
But
put
yeah.
a link to it in the chat, Carl.
Okay.
So Dilip is based there now.
Is that in America, is it? Or
Yes, it's in the Bay Area.
okay. Right. Well, I'll click on that and look at that later. That's where he went. Okay. Right. And then I tried to follow up follow up with some other questions, but couldn't find his working email. And so, where are you based? Are you in academia or are you in an industry somewhere?
No, I'm based in Ghent at the moment. Yeah, I'm not in academia nor in industry at the moment.
I see. You're really subliminal. Very good. Okay. So actually, so Tim is not. He's not got a Ghent academic affiliation, but he's still supervising you
Yeah,
and
we're working
collaborating.
together, I would say, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to patronize you.
Yeah.
Working together. And Giovanni, do you actually go and see Giovanni, or is it just over?
It's been a few years since I've seen him physically, yeah. But I did,
Okay.
yeah, a research stay at his lab a few years ago.
Oh, I see.
That's how we
Excellent.
got the connection.
Yeah, I mean, he loves this kind of thing, so it's great that you're still engaged with him. And I think he's going to be speaking at the International Workshop on Active Inference, isn't he? Yeah, it's wonderful. Okay, so that sort of situates that. Um, just a comment about the discussion in terms of model based and model free, which was certainly something that people like Nathaniel Dorr promoted very heavily, and it was a big thing in their little community, which is a spin-off of there was a spin-off from Neurips, which was Cosine, and then there was a spin-off from Cosine, which was the International Reinforcement Learning meeting or something. And that was that was a sort of the home of that model free versus model based, which I imagine is still going strong. But I think in the discussion you caught the essence of it absolutely. And I remember Giovanni sort of working through these issues and certainly endorsed when you actually looked at the maths that you need to do your everything is model based first of all, but you can habitize certain things so it looks as if it's model free if you see yourself doing something time and time again. So really, you're absolutely right. Well, you're absolutely right to like the notion that you've got to be model based before you can be model free. So the way it's framed in active inference is exactly as Paul was intimating, was that you've got a hierarchy where you just see normal active inference in the spirit of allostasis, as Giovanni would articulate it. And after a while, if you just keep on responding allostatically, in terms of standard active inference formalisms, then that can become habitized. So the E tensor now starts to accumulate Dirichlet parameters, and then that now becomes more precise than the prior afforded by the expected free energy. So your actual planning as inference then becomes dominated by your habits, and dangerous because, of course, if things change, you'll never know because you're not exploring to find out that things change. So it is actually a really interesting vehicle to understand psychopathology and certainly behavioral pathologies, such as say addiction and the like, through this transition from model based. I always get it wrong myself. I think it's a very strange construction from model based to model free, or looks like model based to looks like model free. And it was that sort of reverse strange inversion that Giovanni was celebrating in trying to understand the relationship between sort of homeostasis, allostasis, and habitization or automatization of what were previously allostatic kinds of responses. So that, yes, the, um, the, the questions I had really were just about trying to situate the particular devices and procedures that you've used in the vanilla maths of active inference. Things like the clone thing. How would I understand that if I could only just use active inference? How could I understand, for example, the gating with reward if I just had to use the maths of active inference? If I wasn't allowed to sort of do anything intuitive, I just have to follow the maths. I think that the second thing is much easier um, to understand and motivate, and I'll in a moment I show you the MATLAB code that I think makes that. There is a principal way of doing that particular bit, but I just wanted to understand first of all the cloning, the clone and approach, Dileep's approach, in relation to how one would do that within active inference without appealing to the notion of these clones. And secondly, the grounding likelihood. I just wanted to understand that a little bit more because I didn't quite get that, and I just want to make sure that I do understand it. But first of all, well, actually, no. Let me just deal with this selective learning when you are rewarded. I think that, and just to say that I think that's entirely principled, and it's a natural consequence of active learning, read not in the David McKay sense, but in the sense that I am going to treat learning as an action. And if I'm going to treat learning as an action, then I'm going to select whether to update or not my Dirichlet parameters, for example. If I'm going to select between updating and not updating, then I'm going to need to evaluate the expected free energy under updating and not updating. And therefore, I need to take the expectation of the free energy under all the latent states and paths or policies. And that just reduces to the mutual information entailed by, say, a likelihood mapping and or a transition prior, plus the expected cost, or minus the expected cost. So I like that, because what that says is that, you know, if I marginalize over everything that I might infer in the sense of inference and planning as inference, then what I'm left with in terms of the expected free energy via that expectation or marginalization is just mutual information plus a cross entropy. So it speaks nicely to the community who talk about the Informax principle and minimum redundancy principles, maximum efficiency principles. At the same time, it allows for this cost perspective or reward perspective, that you don't just want to maximize the mutual information of your mappings. You only do it in a constrained way where you're constrained by the expected cost. So if you frame it like that, you can just say you're doing active learning. It's just that people forgot to put that in to the update rule, but now you are. So, you know, if it's of interest, if I quickly show my yeah, we are recording, so there'll be some documentary evidence of that. I'm just waiting for my screen to. Yeah. So I just pulled up. This is the most recent version of the NDP variational Bayes, the triple strength version. And this is the section where we accumulate the concentration parameters. So accumulating the likelihood parameters in this instance, but exactly the same rules apply to the transition dynamics and everything else, including the prior preferences. And the way that this active learning is implemented based upon the expected free energy, which I repeat, in this instance, the expectation is over not just the future conditioned upon a particular action, but also all the paths and all the latent states that subtend that path or policy. And it just reduces to effectively a mutual information constrained by cost functions, by your standard C's here. So you just basically evaluate the expected free energies for your current, entailed by your current Dirichlet parameters, supplied with the cost function either in outcome space or in latent space, and it will return the expected free energy that's summarized in the likelihood mapping. So because you're marginalizing, the nice thing about sort of using Dirichlet parameterizations of probabilistic mappings is that you've got exactly a measure of the expected free energy entailed by everything you've seen so far. So the entire history has now been accumulated in the Dirichlet counts of the likelihood and transition tensors, which means that you now can take the expectation over all time to evaluate the expected free energy, which I repeat just is the mutual information minus the expected cost. So it's all there, and all you need to do is take a really simple function of the before and after your updates. So this PA are your sort of prior Dirichlet counts for the A tensors, the likelihood mappings, and these are what have been accumulated in exactly the same way that you were talking about your grounding likelihood previously. And you just sort of compare the expected free energies and then apply a softmax function. There's an extra hyperparameter here that you can switch it on and off if you wanted to. So you can make it, very precise. I'm definitely only going to update when I'm rewarded, or I don't care. And just revert to vanilla learning and under active inference. And then you just take a Bayesian model average of the Dirichlet parameters after taking a softmax of the two expected free energies. And it really is very, very simple. So this, doesn't it? It should do. Oh dear, dear, dear. I'm sorry about this. No, I don't. That's very bizarre. Where am I? I must be in the wrong anyway, trust me, it's very simple. It's just a set of standard beta log beta transforms of the Dirichlet parameters. So if you wanted to, you could easily sell your gating of the kind you were discussing with Riddy as just another layer of active inference, but this time treating updating as an action that has to be selected in the usual way. And then I repeat, the actual posterior is a Bayesian model average under the likelihood of the two kinds of action update or don't update, and you get a constrained learning or active learning there. So I thought that might be useful for you to resolve that. So could we talk now about the use of the clone graphs? This was basically a way of summarizing allowable transitions. Is that how I understand it? That you've got some sort of state space, but there's a degeneracy in the sense that you observe the same things in different parts of state space, but you can create a graph that basically encodes allowable transitions. Is that how it works?
Yeah, exactly. So it works by having the likelihoods have for one observation mapped to n states. So in this way, there is some kind of degeneracy, but then through sequences of observations, you get transitions that are more likely than others based in, so you can have transition from one state to itself, but then it would map to a different latent. And that's due to just a random noise you have at the initialization of your tensor, basically. And then you will, by going through it multiple times, you strengthen some connections and weaken others. So
I see.
And I think in standard active inference learning, it would be you have the fixed likelihoods, and then you just have the B parameter updates if you do state inference using smoothing. Because then you can have your current state depend on 10 states in the past, and then you encode that trajectory in the latent dynamics.
Yes. What was going through my mind was the using a renormalizing generative model where you do transitions, then transitions of transitions and transitions of transitions. Would that be the same kind of thing? So if I was doing this, I would basically build pairwise transitions. So I see one frame now, I see one outcome now, and then I see the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And then I summarize that at the next level with a new state, which is the transition pair. So the state at the higher level now generates or puts constraints on two frames at the lower level. So clearly, with that kind of redundancy, I'm going to sort of at the first level, at the second level, so the first level latent states sitting on top of the observations. I'm going to get lots of repeats because nothing's changing if I keep getting the same observations. So I'm moving around that central square. But now if I take pairs of pairs, then at some point, at some depth, I'm now going to get a trajectory which is unique, which would, am I right in assuming that would give you the same kind of representation of extended paths that did indeed were implicitly sensitive to the history of transitions, even if they were degenerate and not resolvable locally at the lowest level?
I think so, but now I am wondering if you do the coarse graining in this way, in the traditional clone graph sense, you can, if I can share my screen. The nice thing is that you recover the actual physical structure of this maze. And I wonder if in the renormalization mechanism, you would be limited to the specific paths you follow. Or if you can also recombine them into the grid.
Sorry, I'm just a good question. I'm just thinking about the answer to that. I think so. First of all, if you're just ingesting data in the spirit of sort of supervised structure laying, for example, if you give it the right data, then in principle you are getting the maximally compressed representation from which you could in principle recover the metric structure that would account for this. You wouldn't get it for free, but it would be implicitly there in terms of allowable transitions that could not be compressed any further, which is exactly, well, another way of stating that the representation you want has the maximum mutual information in this instance among the transition matrices, but it may not. You may not be able to get derive from that unless you assumed a two-dimensional grid, the pretty picture that would it would have that metric aspect, but it would be implicit, if not explicit, simply because the discrete state space representations don't have any metric aspect, so you'd have to sort of rebuild that. If so, the clones, the device you use, I presume you just gave it lots and lots of random data, and then just let it learn a compressed representation, which in principle would give you a similar one. Yeah. Yeah, I ask out of interest, but also just to inspire you to think whether there is actually some mathematical isomorphism between trying to recover the allowable path formulation. So I'm coming at this from a sort of Richard Feynman perspective. I'm thinking about objects as paths and orbits, and orbits will have some symmetry or invariance, even if they have a unique aspect, even if they are generating non-unique observations at each point in the orbit. And I'm asking myself, is this clone approach one way of getting at that? Look just by looking at the statistics and then finding a maximally compressed or maximum mutual information representation, and is that equivalent to accumulating that via effectively the under the sort of under the renormalization group approach, maximizing mutual information just by adding things in when and only when you need them to, when you can't explain it with stuff you've already seen. So I'm just thinking about this from the point of view of what is the objective function? Are they the same? And if they're the same, do these represent complementary ways of getting to the same to the same structure? One of the reasons I was asking is just in relation to the first half of the presentation, which is having resolving ambiguity in terms of the outbound paths. That ambiguity only arises when when you only have representations of the next move. But if you've got a deep renormalizing generative model at the second or third level, the latent states are now paths that have a deep history. So there is no ambiguity. You'd always know that you are on this orbit or that orbit. You'd always know where you came from, on where you come, where you're going to, simply because you've got the separation of temporal scales repeatedly in play. And the reason I was thinking that was, of course, you are using that. You're using a separation of temporal scales um, um, through the in your implementation to get this sort of long-term higher level kind of planning there. But you're not using it in the spirit of grouping together in terms of learning. You're using it in terms of planning as inference, with separate scales. If you used it for the learning, then that would sort of I think put constraints on, because it becomes it's much simpler to implement if you just do pairs. So you do pairs of pairs of pairs of pairs, as opposed to keep on going until I've reached my destination, and then tell the level above, request the next inductive prior or empirical prior. Okay. Right. Anyway, I've written on, and I haven't solved my confusion, so I'll go away and think about it. So the other thing I didn't fully understand was the likelihood mapping. I appreciate the importance of that. I mean, from my point of view, or well, I'd say my point of view, in conversations with Tim and you previously, the ability to sort of factorize high level representations, in this instance in terms of the transition dynamics, such that now you can factorize everything you need in terms of lower level likelihood mappings in terms of one schema or one transition dynamic and some context Z, as opposed to having a whole bunch of transition dynamics, all looking apparently different, but could actually be factorized into just one schema and one Z, if you now repermute the mapping from the latents in the single schema to the different different outcomes at the lower level. And I assume that's what you meant by a sort of grounding likelihood, that you're basically doing which is one of the holy grails of this sort of renormalizing generative models, which is to try and factorize the stuff at the higher level. You're doing that by basically saying that there is a solution, but by which I can now replace all these different all these different orbits encoded in relatively precise transition tensors into one transition tensor and one categorical latent state, which you're calling Z. And I can do that simply because for every Z, there's the Z and the transition tensor now interact to give me a unique likelihood. I just have to learn that unique likelihood. Is that a summary of? Would that be a summary of this grounding notion?
Yeah. No, yes, absolutely.
And why did you use the word grounding? Where did that come from?
It's because you're grounding the abstract representation to the specific instance of
I
the
see. Right.
world.
Yes. Right.
Would you
As in
use
Thomas Seller.
I'm sorry, I
Uh,
didn't.
I'm just thinking about other uses of the word grounding and the grounding problem and the like, in the sense of large language models, and people use that notion quite a lot in different. I understand. I see. Okay, so right. So one question I had was, are you then, when learning these or implementing this kind of grounding, are you learning different slices of a likelihood tensor, or are you learning different edges, or remember we talked about latent edges previously?
Yeah.
Are you actually um, remapping the, if you like, the likelihood mapping, or are you just are you by putting different edges in play, or are you building a large likelihood tensor and then just picking out the right slice based upon the latent z?
Yeah, so it's essentially learning a different likelihood slice, which we can then dynamically add slices using the Dirichlet process.
I see.
And yeah, I originally wanted to call it remapping, but then there was confusion with the actual remapping process in neurobiology. So that's why it moved into grounding.
Oh, I think I prefer grounding. Now I understand where it comes from. Um, and in a sense, I think mathematically that this notion of accumulating candidate slices and then picking out the right one for the right context that's driven by the same abstract schema. I, that can be read as effectively changing the mapping from the schema to the outcomes. So I think mathematically they're the same thing. It's just how you'd physically implement it. You actually just want to change the pointers to change the edges by using indices or pointers, or do you actually just want to use those indices to pick out the right slice? I think that's just a computer science issue. Um, so I'm not sure there's any great mathematical distinction between the two, but it's probably easier to do it the way that you've done it, because then you can add extra slices when you need to, when you realize that there's no current slice that best explains the current outcomes. And it also makes it, I think, probably, in fact, it does. I'm just thinking about the way that it's coded up in the SPM active inference. It's slightly easier to infer Z or the context if you've got all the alternatives in play, so you can then rifle through all the different grounded likelihoods and then evaluate the variation free energy and then pick the most likely one in the usual way, as opposed to having to do that by rifling through all the potential different edges. Because once you move into the world of latent edges, they're very discrete objects, so you can't store it as a vector of probabilities. Well, you can, but you have to sort of like you have to evaluate them one by one, whereas you can do it using linear algebra when you've unpacked it. Good. Okay. Right. Well, I've resolved my confusion. So, again, another strange inversion here. Normally, I'd answer your questions, but you've been answering my questions. Do you have any more questions for me?
No, actually, this was nice. Thank you.
For
Thank
sure.
you.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
Right. Sorry. Yeah, we should do some clapping.
Thank you. Clapping for all. Thank you so much, everybody, for yet another successful TNB session that has been fruitful for us all. Yeah, it's definitely a really interesting feature to have within active inference and explore this not only within applied settings, but also by collecting data and seeing to what extent this kind of structure can be informed by how neurons and neural signals perform. But yeah, amazing. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.